Right, we're live.
Okay. Well, first, I'd like to thank you, Carol May, for accepting the invitation that I extended your way to take part in the True Spirituality Summit. The summit is going live today, so this is a very exciting day for me, a long time in the making. And I have interviewed all of the 7 speakers on mini interviews like this one, where I ask them the same 5 questions so that people can get to know them and see if they like them. And then obviously from there, sign up.
Sure.
I haven't seen the live video at this point, even though I'm looking at your profile right now. So I don't know if you're able to add the link to sign up under the video. I was trying to do that myself, but I'm not having a lot of luck. The interviews are the summit is free for 7 days. We have a Q&A Thursday the 13th of July at 11:30 UK time with all of the speakers, but you need to buy a VIP ticket for that. And from the 14th of July, the summit will become a paid product. So this is very exciting time for me. This is the first time this summit. Actually, I can see you live now, but I'm not sure if I can comment underneath. We can always add the link at the end.
Yeah, I could. I was trying to copy it actually, but I don't know. It's not.
I'm not familiar with going live on LinkedIn. This is really a first for me. So it's both exciting and a little bit intimidating.
Daunting at the same time. Yeah,
exactly.
I think I got it. Yeah.
Daunting is the word. So the first question I ask all my guests is, did you grow up in a religious background? And if so, which one?
Yes, so I was a pastor's kid and the firstborn at that. So I grew up and I was born into a Pentecostal church. So that was like my first introduction into religion and spirituality. And I was thinking about this question as well. And I think one of the things that highlighted my kind of curiosity about spirituality and just the quest for what is this all about is my father died when I was 4 years old. So my mum stayed in the church for a little while. And then for her own reasons, then just didn't enjoy being in the Pentecostal church after a while, but still had her faith. So then she moved from the Pentecostal church to the Anglican Church of England church. So that was a big culture shock for us all because we're used to the way that worship and service is done in a Pentecostal church to the way that it's done in a Church of England church. Completely different energies, you know?
I have no idea of the difference. Would
really?
you be? No, yeah. Because I'm a Catholic. I was born and raised in France. So for me, this is completely alien. I'm sorry to say. Yeah. So I'm curious to what was the culture shock?
So the culture shock was just the energy, you know, and that's not to say anything is good or bad, but in the Pentecostal church, it's very loud, it's very boisterous. You'll usually have a full band, a gospel choir, which has a very different energy to like a very church choir, like a Church of England choir. You'll have people are very animated, so there's a lot of answer and call. So if the preacher is talking about something and people agree, then they're gonna stand up and they're gonna shout out and they're gonna, you know, even speaking in tongues. This is different things. A lot of dancing, a lot of celebration. It almost seemed very celebratory, very just the noise, the energy, the loudness of it, and the lack of inhibition around people. So it was a very open kind of way of worshipping. Whereas then when we went to the Church of England church, it was then very quiet, very hushed. You kind of walked in and crept in, and you know, when people were singing the hymns, it was just usually the orchestra, just usually the organ, which in itself is a beautiful instrument, especially if you're in like a massive church or cathedral. But the way that people kind of, there's, you know, the preacher or the vicar, whoever is holding the service, he speaks and everyone listens. You don't say anything. You kind of just, you know, you
Okay.
just kind of
No.
take it in. It was, so those are the different energies of it. So, you know, that was following my mum's journey through religion. And in her funeral, we kind of like closed it in a beautiful way. So the service was in a cathedral, and then when we were at the cemetery and they're going through the burial was very like it would be in a Pentecostal church, where they were singing all the gospel songs and there was call and response and everything like that. So it kind of was like a beautiful kind of, you know, enclosed and a response to the way that she lived her life and the way that she lived her religion. Really, it kind of encapsulated both sides of who she was. So it also showed me that there was no one way to express your belief and worship. So that kind of opened the like inside of me, really.
Yeah, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious as to why you moved from one to the other, but I don't want this interview to be too lengthy, so
Sure.
we might take this conversation offline.
Yeah.
um, the second question I wanted to ask you is, what made you sign up for the summit? Because you didn't know me very well then.
No.
You had just interviewed me once on your podcast,
Yeah.
and yeah,
It was I liked where you were going with it, the idea of true spirituality, and kind of like hitching on my first response to your first question was that already I'd seen that there were lots of different ways of doing things. But in the years that I've gone through lots of different modalities, I've traveled across the world and been in different spaces and different groups and learned different things, is finding the commonality, and a lot of the things that look different kind of take away from the commonality of what it is. And for me, having my own spirituality, my own spiritual philosophy, which is something I always encourage my clients to do, is pull from all of these things and make it your own. There's no one way of doing anything. And the fact that you were talking about spirituality from a very grounded level, because I think that's what puts people off a lot of the time, because of the bells and the whistles and the wording, the terminology, the practices, the trinkets. Most of those things are not important to spirituality. So that's
yeah.
why I wanted to come on, because I like the idea of the groundedness. That's what I'm about.
Thank you. And I think that this is very much my approach. I'm very practical. I used to be a lawyer. I think on LinkedIn, we're talking on LinkedIn here. I think it's very important that we emphasize this so that people understand that they're not going to be roped into some new age cult or something like that. Quite the opposite.
Yes. Yeah.
Then, there's no request to meditate, and there's no need to light crystals, and there's no need to have your aura photographed or things like that. No, no, no. We're looking at something which is much more value-based, much more about who you are in the world, how you see the world, your beliefs, and maybe trying to understand the bigger picture.
Sure.
So
I've done the cult experience, so I can tick that off my list as well.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you have contributed to this summit, because you can speak from experience of what it is like in those spaces, and you've come back from it and you've stripped it back almost to a Zen kind of spirituality, if you don't mind me saying. So that's really, really interesting.
Cool, yeah.
Why do you care about promoting individuality in spirituality?
Because individuality in any aspect as we're living in the world is important, and that kind of gets almost beaten out of us by the way that we operate, really. And it's all about kind of agreeing to what the consensus is in many different things. And then especially if you go into certain groups, you can kind of get swept along with groupthink and the way that things are done, and then you kind of really forget who you are, or don't even get into alignment, to use a spiritual word, and find out who you really are, and find out what is true for you. So you have to kind of really get to that point where you can calibrate what truth feels for you. I mean, we came into the world, most of us, on our own, and yet then we forget that and allow external voices to kind of tell us what we should be thinking and feeling and doing at any point in time and the way that we should be doing it. And finding your individuality within spirituality is the most powerful thing, because then you're totally rooted in who you are, and you know that, and that's your base point, and you make decisions from there. If you're always looking outside of yourself for validation, then it's like that's why I think it breeds a lot of insecurity and anxiety with people. You're always trying to read someone's mind or gauge whether you're doing the right thing by them, as opposed to feeling into whether something feels right to you. And in spirituality, the same way, that's kind of where I came to my own thing, is like, does this resonate with me, or does what they're saying or that practice just not feel that it's given me any value? And there are many things over the time that I got something from, and then it got to a point where it just didn't feel like it was touching the sides anymore, and I moved on, or I just got deeper into the inquiry of like, why do I think that that's not working anymore? And allowing myself to respond to that and actually push myself further towards what that would mean for me. And it's just been way more powerful than taking direction from anyone else. I always listen to new ideas and read new books, but then I run it through my own filter and see whether that aligns with the life that I want to live. So that's why I think it's important.
No, I love your answer. And I think, some people might wonder, well, why do I care about spirituality within my job or within my business? But actually, when you're able to be fully yourself without having to hide any part of yourself, you bring in a passion and a charisma and an energy to everything that you do that makes you unstoppable and irresistible, I find. Suddenly the doors open, people smile at you, people open the door for you, all sorts of things with that. And when you're in the opposite kind of, when you feel constricted and you feel you can't be yourself, the opposite can happen. You get all the traffic lights on the way to wherever you're going, and people kind of rant. And we've experienced both things to know the difference. And I feel spirituality, if it's in the individual and if it lights you up, can really make a difference in your success.
Yeah. And also you get to meet people who know the real you. There's a transition point where you're moving away from playing the game of who you think you should be, and you will lose along the way. Some of those people may come back to you, but there'll be a shift where you're starting to become or even just move away from what you're not, and there's that kind of limbo period of like, who am I? You might feel a bit lost because you're losing everything, but that's the space where you actually work out what is you. And like you say, then when you kind of lean into who you are, and then you've got that energy and that charisma, then suddenly people come out of nowhere, and you can have like such deep, meaningful conversations and attachments in such a short space of time that you then end up kind of on their summit, because you connect with them on a level that is not about me trying to be something that I think maybe Ange would like. It kind of like you start playing a boxing game, dodging these ideas that are not true. Whereas if you be who you are and people be like, oh, I get you, like, you'll be cool for this. Life is so much easier as well. Honestly, it really is. Just be yourself. It's not hard. You don't have to make it up then.
And I can look at I'm a younger self, lawyer working in law firms and then in-house, and I can see that I had the belief that I had to work hard for success. And I've worked on softening that, because even though I think it's very commendable to put all of yourself into something, and I certainly did that for this summit, at the same time, life can be easier. We can do less and have more leverage if we are fully us. And I remember having to feel that I had to leave a whole part of myself outside the office when I went into my work. And I'm looking forward to never having to do that again, whether I work in my business or I go back into corporate.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I'm not for everyone, but the people that I'm for get me, and I feel contracted when I have to kind of watch my words or not worry about upsetting people. It's a harder conversation for me, and I'd rather someone just tell it as it is. I'm a big girl. I can take it, whether you like it or not. Just be true to you. Don't worry about offending people, because it's not, offense isn't something that you put on somebody. It's like they choose that reaction because they're taking things personally, and usually you're taking things personally because you're not in yourself. because when you're in your core and when you're operating from yourself, things that don't resonate with you or things that you don't agree with, you just allow them to be things that you don't agree with. You don't have to go in there and try and enforce your opinion or your ideal on it. You just let something be something that you're not into, and it's okay, you know.
And also, I think you have a lot more energy, and you're less tired from not having to fight all the time or hide all the time.
Yeah.
So I think, it's quite common for people like lawyers to be exhausted because of the workload, but also everything else that comes with it. So for me, it's been a complete win-win, to be yourself and to bring the spirituality. Even you don't have to talk about it, but it makes you you have a different presence. People want to know what you're doing,
Yeah. Yeah.
to be so happy and to have such a charisma and to have people smile at you. It's such a wonderful thing. So I'm going to ask you this question that I've asked all of my other speakers, and I love the answers that I've been getting, is what is the one spiritual thing that you did that you would never do again?
I think early days when I was moving into spirituality, I kind of got caught in the love and light situation where everything had to be like good vibes only and positivity and not think about anything bad because I'd be attracting it, and kind of get really caught up in this kind of like new age thinking, which kind of like overshadows a lot of what spirituality is, and it kind of gets confused a little bit. This like new age stuff doesn't always help you, that new age way of thinking. So it leads to a lot of bypassing, by which I mean you don't really kind of go into the darker areas of yourself and like really examine the shadowy parts of your own personality and existence, because you just want to stay high vibe, which is not, you're kind of doing yourself a disservice really, because a lot of the time the things that are in the shadowy areas of your persona and your personality are things that you just need to reintegrate into yourself in your fullness, and it can actually drive you forwards. Like not everything that we hide in our shadow is necessarily negative. There might be something that you can bring in out of the shadow into your and integrate into yourself that actually moves you forward and actually fills with you with a lot more. So yeah, I'd never do the love and light stuff again, because I think that's a little bit of a lie, and it actually disempowers you from actually stepping into and really discovering who you are.
Yeah, and there's a danger when you don't own. People call it the shadow, but I suppose you could say just the unsavory parts of yourself. If you deny that you have them, you're likely to project them onto other people, and
Right.
to be actually quite unpleasant to other people, when you feel challenged, rather than thinking, oh, I'm feeling this way, and acknowledging that you feel this way and that you don't have to take it out on others. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think also I'm always very wary of people who are overly nice. And I know there are nice people out there, but people who don't allow themselves to have a bad day, or to be angered or upset by anything or disappointed in you, and just always want to be nice about things. It's like that in itself is like, what are you hiding? What are you not sure about? And like a lot of times that niceness then will kind of contract itself, and it ends up coming out as passive aggression, which is actually more toxic than someone just kind of letting it out and telling you to your face. It leads to a lot of confusion, a lot of toxicity and unreal connections and conversations, especially when you want people to be real. Yeah, it's always about just allowing yourself to see the whole of who you are. Like we're all of the things, and there's nothing wrong with that. We've all been through hard times. We've all got things that we still need to dig into and release and forgive. We've all done things that we're not necessarily proud of, that we need to kind of like acknowledge within ourselves. And pretending that we're not those is actually just a disservice on so many different levels, but more importantly to yourself.
And for people who might not necessarily understand what passive aggression is, could you give us some example?
It's usually sometimes it will be like someone will say something to you, but like the energy, the words sound good, but the energy of the words just don't. The instance that I can think of. Sometimes people would like, especially when I was younger, and when girls are around girls and they've not kind of developed themselves, in that there's a lot of jealousy and that kind of stuff. It's always when someone's like, "Oh, you look nice." Now, honestly, does that sound like a compliment to you? You know, it's like someone's like trying to say something really like positive to you, or but there's just this energy of everything that it isn't around it, and you're just like, okay, I'm hearing complimentary words, but I'm not feeling the love. So it can usually be that. And sometimes, you know, as people get more cultured in their passive aggressiveness, shall I say, they're able to kind of do it in a way that like it's super subtle, you know, you wouldn't even really notice it. One of the greater examples is if anyone's ever the importance of being earnest, you know, that whole kind of scene is like a lot of the banter between the women is very passive aggressive. It's very polite, it's very nice, but there's just an undercurrent of, you know, she's like stabbing you with a teaspoon or something like that. So things will necessarily appear that, you know, someone's being very nice to you, but the aggression, the anger of the aggression, or the feeling that unresolved aspect of what that person's not allowing themselves to feel within themselves, they're pushing out to you, and it just comes out even though they're still trying to give you that nice persona. The back end of it, you can feel the charge behind it.
And that's fascinating that you explain it this way, because that's how I explain energy. And that's how I started to understand that someone could say something, but if I felt something that was completely different, I was confused. I think children get confused a lot by adults, and then they start to learn to act like them in this way of not saying what they really mean, or of saying something instead of something. And I find that very often humor and sarcasm are part of that as well. And then of course, if you don't get it, you feel stupid because you've been literally, someone's made fun of you and you didn't realize they were. There's this entire energy which is quite toxic. I agree with you. Wow, I didn't expect it to be that long, but it's really good. I'm loving this conversation. The last question I wanted to ask you, Carol Mae, is what would you say to someone who was sitting on the fence about signing up for the summit? Because I know on LinkedIn, people are very busy. They have busy lives. They have jobs, careers, businesses, families, hobbies. Why would they spend some time with us, listening to us talk about spirituality?
I mean, why not? You know, like especially for the first week, it's not gonna cost you any money, just your time. And it's also, you don't necessarily have to sit and watch us. You can play it in the background while you're doing your things over the weekend. But also, if you've got a curiosity about how spirituality just infuses like everyday real things that we go through, like on the summit, I talk about creativity, but then we also have other speakers talking about parenting, conscious parenting, talking about sensuality, talking about different aspects that all are part of our lives, but telling you and sharing with you how you can bring spirituality into those areas of your life to enrich them without turning it into this kind of big woo-woo dogmatic practice. It doesn't have to be that. Just bringing it into everyday stuff is really just going to help you. And you can find out how that's possible just by signing up. It's easy.
Thank you. And I know people's precious time is as precious as their money as well. But I do agree with you that if it's going to enhance your life and ultimately potentially make you happier,
right,
what have you got to lose, right? Because I do believe that spirituality can enhance and light up your entire life, if only by looking at life in a different way, from a different angle, and usually from a much more positive angle. I mean, I know well, actually, I don't know. I was raised in France, where people complain a lot. I don't know if you've heard about, you know, the marches and now the riots and in the UK, I know that people complain more about the weather, but they do complain as well. To be able to kind of shift that a little bit and have a more positive, especially after we've been for years in you know, the quagmire of you know, financial crisis and COVID, and then another layer, and now there's the strikes in the UK and all that sort of thing. And you need something to kind of light the end of the tunnel and give you some hope and some joy, right?
I think so. And also for me, having had like many life challenges, because that's what life is, right? Being able to look at it from a spiritual aspect as well. So understanding that if I really understand what it means to be a spiritual being, having a human experience, and it's one of your like quotes that you use, and there's a song that I was playing earlier that kind of says that, so I got that on to get me in the mood for that. But if you remember that, then you're able to kind of pull out of the humanness of things sometimes and look at it as a whole. And especially when you really get in touch with the spiritual aspect of yourself and the spirituality within yourself, I've found that it gives me way more compassion for other people. Even if I don't necessarily want to have them in my life, I kind of understand where they're coming from and why they're doing things, because I see that aspect. So it makes me more tolerant. It doesn't mean that I'm just going to put up with stuff. It gives me a strength, but also it gives me a softness as well. It gives me more. That's all I can say, really. It kind of is, like I say, it gives me strength and it gives me softness that I probably had kind of contracted into this kind of stiff bitterness. So yeah, it's expanded my life, and I think it can do that to the extent that anyone wants to experience that in their world.
Thank you for your beautiful answers, and I feel so blessed as well that this recording will be on my podcast when it's launched, so people can go and find you, Carol Mae Whittick, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Obviously, all the links are on the summit as well, so that people can find you. And you have a wonderful podcast called Her Conversation. And her stands for something. Let's tell us before we finish this interview.
Yeah, so her is higher energetic resonance conversations, and I do have another one that goes alongside it called Inspirations, which is more of my solo episodes. So it's just something that kind of came to me as well, was that higher energetic resonance came through to me from another creative experience that is a long story for another day. But yeah, I've been doing podcasts since 2017, and I really enjoy it because it just means that I have the opportunity to just slide into someone's DMs and go, hi, do you want to speak to me? You know, it just opens up new connections in a way that just an empty email may not have done. So it's allowed me to meet people from all over the world doing all sorts of amazing work, and then be able to have really deep, meaningful conversations about what they do and how they see the world, which is my fascination. And then sometimes I meet, ladies like Ange who then invite me onto theirs as well. So it's without the podcast, a lot of the things that have happened in my life would not happen. So I'm glad that I followed through on that little idea that I had. So, that will be inspiration for anyone who has a little idea. Just sometimes go with it, And
that's definitely inspired me to invite you on the summit. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so grateful you said yes.
Yeah.
So I want to thank all of our listeners today. And if you are listening to this after the summit, the free period, after the 13th of July, 2023, don't worry, the platform is still available. You're probably going to have to pay a small sum of money to access the interviews, but it's still going to be there for you. So don't hesitate to reach out, whether it's through the platform or through my Facebook page, Ange De Lumiere. I'm mostly active on LinkedIn and Facebook, so it's easy to find me. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ange.